then for a moment. So thank you so much for the introduction, and great to speak to so many of you all here today. I speak to customers across all sectors across the whole of ASEAN, and nothing scares organizations more than ransomware. In terms of, it's in the news every day. In fact, it's so common now, only the most costly, the most disruptive even make the news. And you don't even need to be in cybersecurity to know what ransomware is and what it can do. Even my 87-year-old mother sometimes phones me and asks me about ransomware. Everybody understands what ransomware is. Now, I'm very interested talking to this audience today, coming from manufacturing, and I understand the low tolerance that you can have for the disruption, the downtime ransomware will bring. And ransomware writers know this, and they can exploit the massive pressure you are under to keep production going at all times. But how big really is the risk, and how can that risk be managed? So I've got a little game here, no prizes, I'm afraid, but please, if you want to put your answers in the chat, please do. But as human beings, we're not very good at detecting, estimating what risk is. So these are 3 high adrenaline activities that have different levels of risk, significantly different levels of risk. Does anybody want to put in the chat which of these 3, bungee jumping, scuba diving, or skydiving, has the highest risk? Put it in the chat and we'll come back to it at the end. It's very hard to answer that question. To calculate risk, there's a couple of pieces of information you need which I haven't shared with you. The first one is, what's the impact of a single event going wrong and happening? So if something went wrong, what's the impact on you or on your organization? And the second one is how frequently you expect that to have. And this leads to the well-established equation to understand risk. Risk is the frequency of an event happening with the expected impact of one of those events happening. So looking at risk in terms of the manufacturing and production industry, today I'm going to go through the latest release of the SOPHOS annual ransomware survey, but focused in on the manufacturing and production sector. So quickly, the report I'm going to pull these numbers from, it was commissioned survey across 5,400 IT managers across 30 countries, it was done through Vanson Bourne, the research house, and across many sectors, of which there were 438 respondents from the manufacturing and production sector. In terms of the type of organisation that responded, 50% in each country were from organisations smaller than 1,000, and 50% from 1,000 to 5,000. In terms of countries, it was spread evenly across the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific, but with a smaller set coming from the Middle East and Africa. So let's look at our first piece of data that we need. How frequently are ransomware attacks happening? So you'll see from the statistic that 36% of ransomware attacks, manufacturing and organizations, they face average 36% of them had a ransomware attack in the previous year. That's pretty much the near the average of 37%. There's actually also an IDC study independent of this that shows 37% being the likelihood of an organization facing a ransomware attack. So that number is pretty solid. You actually saw an IBM report with manufacturing, they have it as the most targeted sector, receiving almost a quarter of all ransomware attacks. But you'll see here across all sectors, the percentage of organizations being hit has actually dropped substantially in the past year. Previously, it was about 51%. It's dropped down to 37%. And this drop is obviously welcome news. The impact of attacks is actually going up. And we're going to drill into these numbers in more detail. So if we analyze the data based on the country, we'll see some interesting results. India has the dubious honour of being the highest likelihood of being hit by ransomware. And interestingly, although we always hear in the news about ransomware attacks coming from China, North Korea, Russia, in India, we're seeing an interesting behaviour where there's a lot of domestic ransomware attacking domestic organisations. For the Philippines is mid-placed. 42% of organisations across all sectors in the Philippines reported suffering a ransomware attack in the previous year. So taken together, I think it's 30 to 40% of manufacturers in the Philippines would expect to be hit by ransomware in a particular year. So that's looking backwards. What about the future sentiment of manufacturing organisations? 49% expect to be hit by ransomware in the future, while 15% just don't anticipate an attack. I'm actually pleased that the future expectation of ransomware hits is actually worse than the reality. That shows a level of realism and indicates that the manufacturing industry is well prepared for the worst case, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst, and is putting in place the responses needed to be able to deal with such an incident. So let's drill into that 49% that expect to be hit by ransomware in the future. We asked why. 60% said ransomware attacks were getting increasingly hard to stop. They were getting more sophisticated. And while this is a very high number, the fact these organisations are alert to ransomware and how it's becoming more and more sophisticated can actually be a good thing. It drives the behaviour to prepare, put in place the plans that are needed to prevent it and respond to it. 46% said ransomware is so prevalent, it's inevitable they'll be hit. And 28% see their own users compromising security as a major factor. And that's actually very true. I'm not talking about malicious, purposely malicious, but although it's not an old or a sophisticated method, phishing via email is still the #1 entry point for all malware, and that includes ransomware. Then we looked at, I think it's even more interesting, the 15% that don't believe they will be hit in the future, to understand why are they so confident. So the #1 reason for that confidence is that they say we've got a very well trained IT staff. They're able to stop the attacks. 56% said that. 42% said they're using ransomware technology, anti-ransomware technology, just like SOPHOS. While the advanced and automated technologies are an essential and effective anti-ransomware defense, stopping the attackers does require the human monitoring and intervention, getting the hands on keyboards by skilled professionals. And that's why it's good to see that organizations do understand the importance of having a very, very trained IT staff. 27% of manufacturing organizations said, we don't expect to be hit by ransomware because we work with a specialist cybersecurity company that may be running a full SOC for us. And again, it's encouraging to see organizations reaching out, outsourcing cybersecurity expertise when they need it, maybe understanding that isn't their core competency and isn't where they want to invest their dollars in their own staff. But it's not all good news. There are some real areas for concern here. 20% cited cybersecurity insurance as a reason they're not going to be hit. Now, as we all know with insurance, it can help with the costs when something does happen, but it doesn't stop the attack itself. And later on, we'll look at why insurance, the part it can play, but not to over-rely on it. And the last number is a really scary number for me. 27% believe they are not the target of a ransomware attacker. Sadly, that's just not true. No organization is safe, regardless of its size. So to recap the frequency, while it's going to be different for every organization, I think it's safe to say for a manufacturing organization in the Philippines, the number to keep in mind is 30 to 40% will suffer a ransomware attack in a particular year. Now, the second piece of information I want to look at is what's the impact, the typical impact of one ransomware attack. So manufacturing and production organizations actually have the lowest propensity to pay the ransom. Now, the ransom is not the entire cost by a long way of a ransomware attack, but it is a significant part of the cost. But it's great news that manufacturing and production are the least likely to pay. Just 1 in 5, 19%. And that's compared to a global average across all sectors of 32%. And this comes from a combination of doing the right things, having the regular backups, having a well-drilled response plan, spotting the attacks early before they can make damage. And across some other sectors, energy, oil and gas are the most likely to pay the ransom, 43%. Now, this sector typically has a lot of legacy infrastructure that can't easily be updated. So maybe the victims feel compelled to pay the ransom just to keep those services going. And depending on which part of manufacturer you're in, you may still have or may have that type of OT technology as well. Now, responding to a critical cyber attack of any kind, especially ransomware, is incredibly stressful. Nothing can completely alleviate that stress, but having an effective, well-documented, well-understood, well-practiced incident response plan has to be done. I can't emphasize that enough. It's therefore very, very good news that 89% of manufacturing and production organizations have a malware incident recovery plan, with just over half of them having a full and detailed plan. So those are very encouraging signs, and just below the global average, but in a good place. So there's clear correlation between what we saw about the likelihood of paying ransom, and you'll see here those organizations, those sectors that are doing regular backups. Manufacturing and production lead the way when it comes to taking good backups of data. And 68% the most able to restore the encrypted data using the backups. And this is probably because manufacturing and production organizations, you understand, is critical, that continuous availability of operations. You just can't afford the dollars lost for every minute that you're not able to manufacture. But the ransomware writers they understand this. So just having backups now is not enough to avoid the risk. They were finding too many organizations were saying, okay, we've got a ransomware attack. Let's just clean these machines, blast the machines clean, restore from backups. And some ransomware writers were, they weren't getting paid as much. So they developed a new extortion, what's called double extortion method. So now, if you have a backup and therefore you're not going to pay the ransom, then they come out with, okay, we're going to leak your data now to the public internet. And that creates another compelling reason for you to pay them. And they threaten to leak that information, which in a manufacturing environment, that will contain much intellectual property, trade secrets, information that is critical to the differentiation and the continued success of your businesses. Now, this statistic really, really annoys me because sometimes people have an assumption that if the worst happens, you don't have the backups, you might just have to pay the ransom. And I get that. It's not an ethical view. I understand if that's the situation you're in, that's the situation you're in. What many people don't realize is of organizations that paid the ransom, only 7% got all their data back. Attackers don't say when they give you ransom demands, well, you're only going to get some of your data back. You don't get a guarantee with them. And I don't think this is employ on purpose. I just think it's as a ransom. If you put yourself in the mindset of somebody creating ransomware, they're going to spend their time encrypting the data, making sure you know who's encrypted the data, making sure you know how to pay. How the data is decrypted is a much lower priority. They're not looking for return customers. So just through bugs in their decryption capabilities, it means that only 7% of organizations got all their data back, while 40% of organizations got less than half their data back, even after paying the ransom. I realise I'm throwing a lot of data points at you today, so let me just summarize some of those data points. 36% of manufacturing and production organizations were hit by ransomware last year. 49% of those organizations that were hit by ransomware said cybercriminals succeeded in encrypting data. 19% had to pay a ransom to get some of their data back, not all, but some. 68% of people whose data was encrypted restored that data using backups, which is a great number for manufacturing. 89% of manufacturing and production organizations have a malware incident recovery plan. And the average bill for rectifying a ransomware attack in the manufacturing sector, and now this considers downtime, people time, device cost, network cost, lost opportunity, ransom paid, was $1.52 million US. Now remember, this is for an organization of an average size of 2,500 employees. So every organization's data is going to be different, but if I try and do a bit of a mental arithmetic here, so 36% of organizations suffered a ransomware attack. Half of those, the encryption happened, so let's say 18%, or for the simple mind, I'll say 20%. So 20% of organizations will have encrypted data each year due to a ransomware attack. The average ransomware remediation cost is $1.52 million. It's around about $300,000 US a year. Now, that's very quick maths, but it gives an idea of the kind of quantification of risk that organizations are facing in the manufacturing sector from ransomware. Now, every organization will be different, but it just gives some idea. So let's say we stick with that 300,000. So we've got an idea now of what the quantity, what the risk level is, because we know the frequency and we know the impact. How do I manage that number? How do I manage that risk? There are only 4 ways any risk can be managed. You avoid, you accept, you transfer, you mitigate. So how do you avoid the risk of ransomware? Well, the reality is, if you're in business and you've got IT systems or OT systems, it's pretty much impossible to avoid the risk of ransomware. I can accept it. Maybe you do. I don't hear of many organizations taking this route, but maybe that is the way. Maybe you say, I'm going to put aside $300,000 a year and accept I'm going to be hit by ransomware. Now, of course, that it's not just the financial cost you're dealing with there as well. You know, what is your reputation in your supply chain if you keep getting hit? It's not accepted. People don't generally go the accepted route. So then you go maybe I'll transfer, maybe I'll use cyber insurance. And cyber insurance has got a very important part to play in cybersecurity. And certainly in ransomware as well. You wouldn't use it alone and you wouldn't lean on it too heavily, because imagine, like with any insurance, maybe car insurance, if you keep having accident after accident after accident because you don't bother driving safely because you've got car insurance, what's going to happen to your premiums? They're going to keep going up and up and up until in the end, nobody's going to want to insure you, or it's going to be so expensive, you might as well go back to the accept method and just put the money aside every year. So where I'm going to focus today is around mitigation. How do you reduce that risk? How do you manage that risk? Well, in terms of recommendations, number 1, assume you will be hit. Ransomware is very prevalent. No sector, government, country, organization is immune from it. And manufacturers seem to be the best sector at being realists around this. And when it comes to your cybersecurity, what this means is don't just focus on the protection. Accept you're going to be hit. Accept things will get through to protection. How do you detect those attacks early and how do you respond to them? Number 2, make backups. There's a simple memory aid for backups, 3, 2, 1. You should have at least 3 copies. 2 different backup systems, and 1 copy stored offline. Deploy layered protection. No ransomware attack is just one method. If we look at the chain that ransomware attack could go through, phishing attack sends you to a malicious URL, or it could come through a supply chain, it results in credential theft, privilege escalation. It goes through all of these stages. No one product is going to be able to protect you across this whole chain. And as an industry, we make it difficult for people, we really do. Now, there's plenty of choice, too much choice. You could pick a different product to protect you against each one of those stages in a ransomware attack. What's that going to mean? How are you going to be able to operate that? How many consoles will you have? What integration is there between them? How do you keep your staff trained on how to use each one? And SOPHOS back in 2015 understood this challenge. We realized with following a siloed security method, organizations they were struggling under the strain of how to manage, how to integrate across all of these solutions. And we came up with Synchronized Security, which has now evolved to adaptive cybersecurity ecosystem, all managed through a single console, all sharing a data lake. So the information, the events seen at each one of our products feed into a data lake, allowing us to really understand and correlate and come up with the intelligence you need about what's really happening from a cybersecurity perspective. And we'll think through some of those products. So we have email protection, being able to stop the phishing attack in the first place. Firewalls to prevent any call out from the malware to a command and control. We have our endpoint protection, InterceptX, which has CryptoGuard as a feature, which actually detects ransomware when it's trying to encrypt data, even if it's never been seen before, being able to stop it and automatically roll back any files that have been encrypted already. We have XDR, allowing you to move from that prevention only to the deeper levels of detection and response. Because when an attack happens, assuming it does breach your defenses somehow, you only have 2 choices. It's like, well, when do I detect it's happened? And you've only got 2 choices there. Either when you get the message on the screen saying this machine is encrypted, or before then. That's what XDR does. It allows you to enable your team to be able to achieve those detection and response much quicker, and ransomware does not take long to get through those chains, so you really need to be quick. But we also have rapid response, an incident response service that can help you should the worst happen. Then there is don't pay the ransom. I'm not making an ethical statement on this. What I mean is you don't want to be in the position where you have to pay the ransom, because as we saw, even paying it doesn't guarantee you get your files back. Have a malware recovery plan. That's the best way to stop a cyber attack turning into a full breach. You prepare. Organizations that fall victim to an attack, they realize they could have avoided so much loss of cost, pain, disruption, if only they'd had an incident response plan in the first place. You don't want to be working out what to do in the heat of a battle. And the final part is to combine humans and technology. Technology alone can do a lot. But when it comes to looking for those early indicators of attack, those early indicators of compromise, where the attackers have their hands on the keyboard and are doing manual activities to get into your systems, that is still best understood and identified by real experts who understand what they're looking for. And this is really good information to see that most organizations in the world and the Philippines understand this. They are investing more and more, and it's only a tiny fraction of organizations now that think we don't need human-led threat hunts. And what I mean by threat hunts is, even when there's no evidence that something's gone wrong, your organization looking at what's happening in your IT infrastructure, looking to see, are there any suspicious activities going on that could be the earlier stages of an attack? Technology on its own can do a lot, but it needs those humans to be able to do that. So then the question is, okay, do I have the people in my organization to be able to do that? Do I have the highly skilled cybersecurity teams who can do the proactive threat hunting, who can do the incident response, and are able to be available 24 hours a day, every day of the week, every day of the year? And not forgetting that it's not a coincidence that most major ransomware attacks tend to happen over a holiday weekend. That's a strategy by the attackers because they know many teams will be short on staff at that point. So the question to ask is, do I have the threat hunters and incident responders to do this 24/7? If you do, great. That's where solutions such as XDR, Extended Detection Response, provide the technology to turbocharge your teams to be able to do the proactive threat hunting and the incident response. That's giving you the technology to go alongside your people and processes. But if it's not, if you don't have that team, don't worry. That's where SOPHOS can help with managed threat response. This is where our team of skilled experts are working on your behalf, doing the proactive threat hunting ahead of time, and also available so that if the worst does happen, you have guaranteed incident response team waiting to go. So if you found this session interesting, I hope you did. We've got many more resources that should be of interest to you. We have the report I've taken the statistics out of, our State of Ransomware 2021 report for the manufacturing production industries. We've got the incident response guide that takes you through the 10 main steps you should plan. And finally, we've got 4 key tips for incident response experts. And also, cybersecurity, the human challenge, looking at the challenges organizations are having finding the right human skills themselves and why so many more are looking to outside organizations to help bolster their own cyber capabilities. And so finally, I don't know if anybody who's get this right, but I'll share the results of this. So in third place in terms of risk is bungee jumping. 1 in 500,000 risk of a fatality in bungee jumping. Second place is skydiving, and first place scuba diving. Now, it's not necessarily the order that surprises me there, but what really surprises me is that scuba diving is 3 times more risky than skydiving and a massive 15 times more risky than bungee jumping. As I said, as humans aren't great at correctly estimating risk, which is why I'm hoping I've helped you a little bit today in understanding the risk facing manufacturing from ransomware. Thank you.